Hi everybody, it's Make It Month 9 and this month we're looking at claw setting. So if you remember back to Make It Month 5, we looked at bezel setting, so how to set cabochons in both handmade and pre-made bezel cups, like this one. And then we also looked at coil connections, so how you could set stones with tabs and riveting. So we've covered various ways that you can attach stones and things to your jewellery, but this month we're going to take it up a notch and we're going to be doing claw setting, sometimes called basket setting, and the reason it's taking it up a notch is because it's just a little bit more fiddly than the other techniques that we've done so far. But we're going to start with the absolute basics, which isn't too fiddly, and then we're going to build on it from there, and then at the end I'm going to show you some cheats as well for those of you who don't want to do the fiddly stuff, because there's plenty of ways of incorporating claw setting into your work without spending hours making baskets. Lots of you commented about the little pebble ring that I posted at the beginning of this month as an example. So here is the ring band. So it's a sterling silver ring, 2mm round wire that I made. And for those of you that are interested, the texture on it is reticulation, which we're going to be looking at later in the year. So that gives it that gnarly texture. And then all the claw setting is on this one is a little cross of wire, which you then pull up and you can wrap over your stone. So for example, the original one was a little pebble, or here I have a little seashell, so I can pop that in there and then push those claws over, or you can use a tool like the pusher that we used in Make It Month 5 just to push the claws over where there's a point of contact. So it's very similar to when we were doing the tab setting. You just got to take your time, a little bit fiddly. There we go. So very similar to the tab setting. You just find your points of contact where your stone or your shell can't slide out either in any direction, and then you push the wires over using whatever you've got to hand. So I use my pusher, but you could use a burnisher, you could use a teaspoon, whatever you've got. But the important thing is that it's nice and secure and it's not going to fall out. And like I said, that's one of the most simplest ways to do it, is just a cross of wire that's then been soldered onto your piece of jewellery, and that wire has been pushed over your stone. But I'm going to show you how to do this, but a more advanced one. So I'll show you how to make the cross, how to solder it onto something, and how to finish these ends off a little bit fancier than the plain one. What I've got here is a little brass ring, so one that I've made previously that I found in the scrap pot. I have something that I want to set, so this is a little carnelian bead, but it could be a piece of sea glass, it could be a pebble, a shell, a cabochon, something that's either rounded or flat in the back for these sort of settings. And then I've got two bits of brass wire. Two bits of brass wire. The thickness of the wire depends on the thing that you're trying to set, because if you've got a fairly small stone, you don't want to cover most of your stone up with big chunky wire claws. You want to keep them fairly thin. But equally, if you've got quite a big stone, you don't want to use super thin claws because they might bend out of shape and not be strong enough to hold your piece. So this is 0.8mm round brass wire, and equally about 1mm would look quite nice. Anything thicker might look a bit dominating and chunky. I've crossed my two bits of wire over, one on top of the other, and then I just give it a little tap with a hammer. And what that does is it makes a little recess, one on both sides, one on one side of both bits of wire, and then they will now slot together nicely, which means when I solder them they're not going to be moving around as much. So I'm ready to take that over and give them to solder them together. Now I'm just applying some flux. I'm using my borax. I'm going to pop them back together so they sit nice and secure, so those two little recesses are sitting in each other. And then I'm going to get a little bit of solder and find a small piece, and I'm going to place that on one of my bottom wires buttered up against the top one, so the solder is touching both pieces that I want to join together. So now I'm going to light my torch and I'm going to heat the opposite side of where I put my solder. because the solder is going to want to run towards the heat, and that's it gone. All done. So I just need to cool this, pickle it so it's nice and clean, and then I'll solder it onto my ring band. So now I've got my ring band, I've put it in my third hand pliers. I'm going to flux the bottom of it. I'm going to flux my cross, and then I'm going to place the two together so that the cross is touching the middle of that ring band. And I've got a nice tight joint. Now I'm going to get another little bit of solder, and again I'm going to place it so it's sat on the wires but also buttered up against the edge of my ring band so it's touching both surfaces. I'm going to light my torch. If you remember from the soldering handout, what I need to do is I need to make sure I get as much heat through the ring band as possible without the little prongs getting too hot. There we go. Right, so my cross is now soldered to my ring band, and I'm going to take my bead and I'm going to hold it where I want it to go, and I'm going to pull these prongs straight, just roughly, so that the stone is less likely to fall out. Just to give me a bit of an idea of how high I'm going to want these to be. There you go, like that. If you remember from when we were doing tab setting and things like that, in theory, if I was leaving my prongs plain, tongue twister, I would cut them a little mil or half a mil higher than the point at which the stone or shell starts to curve. So I've got something that I can push over the curve. But because I want to melt the ends of these prongs, I need to figure out the point at which it starts to curve and then add about 4 or 5 mil. So if say normally the prong would be that height, but actually because I want to melt it, I'm going to make it that height, so that by the time I've melted that end it should end up about the height that I want it to be. So I'm going to mark the rest of my prongs the same height, and then I'm going to chop them down. To chop them, I've got my little side cutters. I'm going to cut one, and then I'm going to cut the rest all the same height where I drew those marks. So that's all trimmed down now. I'll pop this back in to check it. It's looking good. So they're a nice uniform height, but they're a good 4 mil taller than they would need to be if I was leaving them plain, because if I was just going to push them over at this point, by the time I push that wire over, it'd be covering a lot of the surface of my my bead because they're so long, whereas by the time I ball them down, they're going to be about 4 or 5 mil shorter, and they should be a perfect height. A lot of people struggle to get brass wire to ball up. The trick to it is to have lots of flux. So I've painted quite a bit of borax on the end of those prongs. Now I'm going to light my torch, and I'm going to hold the end of each prong one at a time in the tip of the flame. And I'm going to hold it there until it melts into a little ball. So it's starting to go. I'll make it a bit bigger. There we go. And move on to the next one. Just want to be careful that you're not accidentally heating any of the wires apart from the one that you're trying to ball up, so just keep an eye on your angles. Got some little ball prongs. So it's worth mentioning again, if you're using brass, people keep panicking. I see lots of comments about it going a weird pink colour after you've heated and pickled it, that's completely normal. It's the equivalent of your silver turning white after you've pickled it, or you know, copper normally goes that strange pink colour as well. You just need to give it a little sand and polish and it will come up lovely. So now I just need to pop my stone in. Check the height, they look like they're going to be alright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop this ring into a hand clamp just to make it easier to hold on to while I'm doing the setting. Like so. Pop this in place and then I'm going to start it off by hand, just pushing those wires into position. Like that. When you've got them positioned by hand, I'm going to swap to my pusher, and I'm just using this to put a little bit more pressure on so that I know these are as tight as they can be. And it's the same as when we did the bezel setting. You want to work at opposites. So that you don't end up pushing it up and out. Keep pushing until it's nice and secure. But it's getting there, I just don't want it jiggling around, so I'm going to keep at it. There you go. It's not wiggling around, not jiggling. Set nice and uniform. Super simple little prong ring. This one with balls. Another way so you can see it. This one without. So these are about as simple as it gets if you're making your own. So if you haven't had a go before, have a go. It's fun, it's easy to do. You just need to make that cross shape and solder that cross onto whatever you want, normally a ring. And then those wires are going to be your prongs. The one top tip I would say is resist the urge when you're positioning your prongs over your piece, when you're rubbering them over. Do not keep positioning them bending back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, because eventually they will just snap off and then you've ruined all your hard work. You need to start again. So try and be quite decisive when you push them over rather than bending them back and forth all the time, but otherwise have a go.